Welcome to the GSMC Car Podcast, the show that takes you on a journey to the automotive world. We talk about the latest news, from new makes and models to new technology to all of the must-have options available. Whether you're a fan of the old classics, love the latest models and technology, or have never met a vehicle you didn't want to work on, the GSMC Car Podcast has something for every car enthusiast.
Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Car Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, David Lucy Mabel. All right, today, folks, in this podcast, we are going to be discussing a group of automobiles from a certain country that is commonly overlooked, at least was commonly overlooked until recently. No, we're not talking about Swedish cars, even though Swedish cars are commonly overlooked, but we are talking about South Korean cars. And here's the reason why. South Korean cars have risen rapidly through the ranks in the most recent decades. When you think of it, in probably the late 90s, early 2000s, brands like Hyundai and Kia were still, I'm not going to say they were small automakers, but they weren't very big here in the United States. People didn't really care for them. People didn't really like them. And not only that, they frankly weren't very good here either. But in recent years, since probably the end of the 2010s, Kia and Hyundai have made leaps and bounds in their progress when it comes to marketing, when it comes to quality of their cars, quality of their product, reliability, everything all around. You could just put, it's almost as if though you can put a exact finger on the time that they started actually caring about their cars and caring about what their public perception was. So it's really been amazing what they have come to these days. And, you know, we should probably take a look back at their very humble beginnings. So in this podcast, we are going to be discussing the two main Korean car brands. I mean, there are some others, but we're going to be discussing the main ones, the ones that are making the most progress. So you have ones like Hyundai and Kia. Those are the ones we're going to be discussing. I believe Kia is going to be discussed in segment 1. Hyundai is going to be discussed in segment 2. In segment 3, you're going to hear about their ventures into the luxury car world, and then you'll hear about my thoughts. And in segment 4, I've got a special story for you all today. It's a personal story about I guess some recent car issues that I have been having that I think you all might enjoy and perhaps find even slightly amusing. So moving on from that, let's get started. So essentially, there are two main Korean car brands, as you have heard me say. There is Kia and there is Hyundai. Yeah, those are the main ones. There are not really others. There was Daewoo at the time, a long time ago during the late 90s, early 2000s, but Daewoo was like rebadged GM cars, if I remember that correctly, and I have not seen a Daewoo in forever. I mean, like, they don't make them anymore. I'm pretty sure they don't make them anymore. I haven't seen them in forever, and frankly, they were kind of junky when they were new anyway. So those are not cars that you really care about. They're not really worth mentioning. So of the two ones, there are Kia and there is Hyundai. Kia is South Korea's second largest automobile manufacturer. It actually stands for Korean International Automotive. Fun fact, actually, the name Kia roughly translates to rising from the east. It comes from the old Korean character for ki, which means east, and then which means to rise. So it means almost rising from the east. That's what it translates to, which is kind of cool because, Asia is typically referred to as the East, and it's an Asian car company. So I thought that would be nice for you all to know. It was founded in 1944. Now, guess what Kia actually used to make before they started making cars? I mean, this actually happens a lot. Like, there are car companies who start out not even making cars. I mean, I think Jaguar started out making motorcycles, Lamborghini started out making tractors. Well, Kia started making out, or Kia started out making, Kia did not start making out. Cars don't do that. But Kia started making manufacturing parts for bicycles. They started making bicycle parts, and eventually they started producing their very own bicycles. The name changed from Kyongsung Precision Industry to Kia in 1952. So from 1944 to 1951, they created bicycle parts. Then in 1951, they made their own bicycle. And from 1952 to 1957, they worked on bicycles. They worked on Honda licensed motorcycles. Then in 1957, they started venturing out, and then eventually in 1962. They started working on Mazda licensed trucks, and in 1974 they started working on Mazda licensed cars. So after getting their first, opening their first integrated car manufacturing plant in the year 1973, they manufactured a small line of cars called the Brisa line of cars until they were forced to create trucks by the South Korean dictator Chung Do-hwan, to consolidate and focus entirely on building small trucks. So, so far, here we have a company that from 1944 to 1981 is struggling as a car company, really. I mean, they first started making bicycle parts, then they made a bicycle, then they started making motorcycles, then they started making other people's cars that were used under license. Then when they finally started making their own cars, then they were shut down and then forced to, make trucks by the oppressive government. And then now it's 1981 again, or it's not again, but it's 1981. And then Kia is trying to get itself back into car company, or back into the car scene. So what does Kia do? Kia rejoins the automotive scene in partnership with Ford, because that's a logical thing to do. If you want to get back into the automotive scene and you've been abandoned, you merge with someone else until you can be out on your own. They produce several Mazda-derived vehicles. Now, those of you who are privy to car history, if I could put it that way, because that's what it is. I mean, Ford used to own Mazda. For example, my best friend and a former roommate, James, used to drive a Mazda Tribute. Mazda Tribute is basically just a Ford Escape or a Mercury Mariner. They're all mechanically identical. So that's just to show you that Ford used to own Mazda and might even own a couple of shares of Mazda even today, even though I believe Mazda is his own independent company now, but I could be wrong. Don't quote me on that. So moving on from that, in 1992, they came to the United States. They started out at 4 dealerships in Portland, Oregon. Now, when I read this during my research, I did not read it as they owned 4 dealerships in Portland. I read it as that they started out at 4 dealerships, meaning that they sold Kia cars at other dealerships that sold other cars too. So Kia started out real small in the United States. And some of you may be old enough to remember when Kias were first coming in. I mean, my old bus driver, freshman year of high school, her name was Miss Michelle. I love Miss Michelle. She told me that she absolutely hated Kias and Hyundais because when they had first come out, these things were so dang cheap that they were selling one, and it was buy one get one free when they were selling them. I mean, I guess they were just that cheap, and they were just trying to get people to buy them. And frankly, they weren't very good they weren't very good cars. They weren't built very well. And so those early Hyundais and Kias, you just want to avoid them as the plague, man. So yeah, it wasn't that great. But nonetheless, they slowly expanded until declaring bankruptcy, unfortunately, in 1997 during the Asian financial crisis. And then Kia was saved when Hyundai acquired a 51% share of their company. So basically, Kia was bought out by Hyundai. I mean, maybe not 100%, but they were bought out by Hyundai, and Hyundai saved Kia's life. Kia probably wouldn't still be around if it weren't for Hyundai, not gonna lie. Kia has since methodically expanded in the US and Europe, eventually ranking number 1 in reliability. I did not believe this when I saw this, honest. I can't even finish reading my notes. I find that to be sort of ridiculous. But anyway, let me just try to finish saying this. Kia has since methodically expanded in the United States and Europe, and eventually ranking number 1 in reliability in the U.S. by J.D. Power and Associates. It was the first luxury brand since 1989 to top that list. What? Kia is... I always knew that people like their Kias and whatnot, but I never thought that Kia would be at the top of the reliability ratings for J.D. Power and Associates. These are things that you expect Japanese cars to just top and to dominate and not let anybody get in. I'm thinking the only reason why that they hadn't been around, a luxury car company hadn't been around since, or not hadn't been around, but hadn't topped the list since 1989 was probably because Lexus probably dominated it every year, and then Kia just edged out Lexus in that year. I have no evidence to support that whatsoever, but I feel that's what it is, because Lexus came out in 1989, and Lexus is not only luxurious, it's made by Toyota. How can you go wrong when it comes to reliability? But, the thing is, I'm shocked. It's just to show you that even though my own perspective as an automotive purist is the fact that Korean cars have their merits, but I would still never drive one. That is not the consensus of the general population as a whole. The general population, especially those who own South Korean cars, tend to love them. I mean, they love their Kias. They love their Hyundais. Even if it's just a Hyundai accent. I love my Hyundai accent. Why do you love your Hyundai accent? I have absolutely no earthly clue. But they love them. And I think because they've been able to market a lovable product, a product that people want to keep, market a product that people actually look forward to owning and to driving for the next several years, perhaps even decade, I feel like Kia and Hyundai owners are in no rush to get the newest, latest car. They're no rush to get the newest, greatest car because they already have Kias now that they're not wanting to get rid of. I don't know since when did these people become so loyal. I mean, this is the automotive loyalty that I never knew existed. And I'm not complaining about it. I think it's great for them. It's just, I'm just genuinely shocked. I really am. I didn't think that was a thing. I mean, I grew up, when Hyundai and Kia were not that great. I mean, let's just put it into perspective. When Kia finally came to the United States in 1992, they only sold one car, and it was the Sophia. And then 1993, they came out with the Sportage. So for the first 2 years that they came out in the United States, they had one SUV and one sedan. That was it. That's all they offered. And yet, they have somehow crawled their way and been frugal and I guess saved money, did something for them to now be so, I guess, so commonplace that people like me are making podcasts about them. I mean, there was a time nobody on earth knew what Kia was, what they made, what their things, but she's risen above all of my they've risen above all of my expectations, and I think it's absolutely wonderful. Maybe not wonderful as in the cars are wonderful, but it's a wonderful success story. How rapidly they have grown and expanded. I mean, even though it started out slow, I mean, they are doing very, very well for themselves. Not to say that I would complain, because I don't own a Kia. I've never even driven a Kia to my knowledge, but they've done very well for themselves. It's unlike Chrysler, who can't do anything correctly and is probably going to end up going out of business. I mean, Kia has done very good. Kia has done very good. And you will soon see in the next segment about Hyundai, why Hyundai has also done very good for itself. And I will raise you this. Hyundai, I believe, has done even better than Kia. So please stay tuned and listen after the break, because you will find out more about the Hyundai Motor Company and its history as the largest South Korean automaker and one of the largest automakers in the world. So please stay tuned.
Are you a business owner? Someone interested in the latest news that might affect your business? Then check out the GSMC Business News Podcast, a show dedicated to keeping you up to date on all things concerning business, technology, and the stock market. Get a head start on the day as we keep you updated on the latest goings-on Wall Street, money, jobs, and technology. The GSMC Business News Podcast has you covered.
All right, welcome back, wonderful car people. So, this is segment 2. In the last segment, we discussed Kia. But in this segment, we're going to be discussing Hyundai. You heard about the very, very humble beginnings of Kia making bicycles and making bicycle parts, not even whole bicycles. And then coming to the United States and basically achieving the American dream. And not only that, but doing it better than some American car companies could ever hope to. I mean, the platform that Hyundai walks on is a lot more, I guess, forward and solid than the platform that Kia walks on, but Kia has still made some strides and steps in recent years. So that was worth mentioning. So in this segment, however, we're going to be discussing Hyundai, and we're going to be discussing Hyundai as the larger of the two main South Korean brands. So let's get started. Currently, Hyundai owns 32.8% of Kia. And it owns Genesis, their luxury brand, and it has an electrical vehicle subsidiary called Ioniq. Now, I believe the Ioniq is a Hyundai that's meant to combat the Prius, because I know our old friend, an old friend of ours, her name is Miss Treva. Miss Treva, a little old lady who used to live next door to us, she drives a Hyundai Ioniq, and she used to drive a Prius, and she was like, this is basically Hyundai's Prius. So I don't know much about the Ioniq. I didn't know it was a completely different line, but then maybe they're making it into a different line of hybrid and electric vehicles. I really do not know. But it was founded in 1967, and Hyundai vehicles are sold in, get this, 193 countries through about 5,000 dealerships and showrooms. I am floored. I'm going to tell you why I'm floored. I have done lots of research in my years in school. I know my geography pretty darn well. There are about 196 independent countries. Hyundai sells to 193 of those 196 independent countries. They don't sell in North Korea, which is one of them, and they don't sell in two more. which if I were to just guess off the top of my head, probably Malawi and Somalia, but I have no clue. They sell their cars in almost the entire world. I don't know of a car company besides maybe Toyota and Mercedes-Benz that lay a claim to that much of a market share of the earth. I almost feel like in the United States, we have been robbed of South Korean cars because I feel like South Korean cars, we've only gotten to experience them within the past 20, 30 years or so, and most of our experiences weren't very good. But if, they're selling these cars in 193 different countries, I would like to go to another country that started having Kia and Hyundai sales. And actually, I should not be talking about Kia in this segment because Kia is technically not fully under Hyundai. But I would like to see their Hyundai sales and see what sorts of things that were on the road 20, 25, 30 years ago when they were just getting, when they were just dipping their toe into the United States market. How, when, what happened for them to be so big in other countries, and how did they end up gaining that much popularity? I mean, I'm very confused. I'm very excited to learn all this, but I had no clue. I had no clue that they had sold cars to this many countries. I mean, that's crazy. None of the American companies do that. Ford and GM don't do that. You can't go to the middle of the Central African Republic and think you're going to buy a brand new Cadillac DeVille. I mean, that's not going to happen. But apparently so. You might be able to buy a Kia or a Hyundai, and I keep on saying Kia, darn it, but you might be able to find a Hyundai over there. I mean, like, I didn't know. I didn't know. So there you all know too. I learned something new today, and I was very excited about that. So they are one of the world's largest automotive. They own one of the world's largest automotive manufacturing plants in Ulsan, South Korea. Does this surprise you? It doesn't surprise me much. For a car company to sell that many cars to that many people, they are going to need a very large manufacturing plant, not only in the country that they originate, but they're going to have to start popping them up in the countries that they wish to sell to. It will bring jobs and it will bring more awareness. So there's that. I guess, they are part of some sort of manufacturing process that allows them to sustain such a large building and I have no clue how they're even able to have an automotive manufacturing plant that's that large. But nonetheless, they have their ways around that. Fun fact, did you know that Hyundai's first car was a rebadged Ford Cortina? I have to give a little side story on this, if you all will permit me to. Actually, you all don't have a say, so you're going to listen to my side story. But I remember as a child playing a game called GT Legends on the computer. It was basically a racing game of these old classic cars that were used in FIA, GTC, TC racing, like the European style of races. I don't know much about car racing, ironically, because I'm a car guy, but basically that's what the game was based off of. And I remember one of my favorite cars to drive in the game ever was the Lotus Cortina. Now, the Lotus Cortina was basically a high-performance version of the Ford Cortina. I knew that the Ford Cortina had been sold in several different variants by several different car companies. There were even some made in Brazil or for Brazil or something like that. But then when I hear that Kia's first car was the Ford Cortina that they rebadged obviously as the Hyundai Cortina, and did I say Kia again? I'm sorry. The Hyundai Cortina. I I was very, very intrigued in how that ended up happening. So basically, what was the philosophy, I imagine, with these South Korean companies is to build other people's cars under license so that they can make money instead of having to spend the money and the resources to develop their own cars and develop their own engines eventually when it came down the line. So what they would do for the longest while, they would build cars under license. Then they got a bit more complicated, and then they got a bit more confident, if you will, and then they started making their own cars, and then they started making their own engines and drivetrains, and now these things are made from Kia themselves, but it hasn't always been that case. So they did the same thing with the Ford Cortina. They badged it as the Hyundai Cortina, and they drove it around South Korea. This car would eventually be replaced by the Hyundai Stellar, the second generation of which would be sold as none other than the Hyundai Sonata in the United States. And that Sonata was a Mitsubishi engine. So I remember seeing this on, I think it was like Car Throttle or something, and an article online that said the Ford, like the Hyundai Stellar, I believe, was the Ford that Mitsubishi built. And when you think of it, it was a Ford product at some point using Ford components, and it was competing against Ford because it just replaced the Lotus Cortina, or not the Lotus Cortina, but the Ford Cortina as the basis for the Hyundai Cortina. And you know, it just made it seem like everything had come full circle. That was really interesting. I mean, the Hyundai Stellar would eventually become the Hyundai Sonata. So, I mean, it's as if though the Hyundai Sonata and the Ford and Lotus Cortina all have a common ancestor, if you will, which I think that's absolutely amazing. But then again, goodness, not Kia, darn it. If anybody out there, I'm sorry, y'all. I just always tend to associate Kia with Hyundai, but I'm talking about Hyundai in this case. They just associate Hyundai with I guess Hyundai was owned by Ford at the time, so it makes sense that their first car would be a rebadged Ford vehicle. I just never thought that it would ever be that. I mean, for me, the Ford or Lotus Cortina, depending on what you want to call it, I mean, that's just so far removed from South Korea and Asian culture and Asian car companies and whatnot that I never thought that would ever actually happen. But I am wrong. I am wrong. So moving on, the first fully South Korean car ever was the Hyundai Pony. Also had a Mitsubishi engine, by the way. Hyundai came to the U.S. in 1986, so about 6 years before Kia ever did. They started making cars with their own technology in 1988. In 1998, Hyundai began to revamp their image to work towards becoming a world-class brand, and they made several changes. They had better styling, they had better quality, and they added 10-year, 100,000-mile warranties, which you can still find at many Hyundai and Kia dealerships today, by the way. And in 2011, Hyundai was the fourth largest automobile maker in the world after GM, Volkswagen, and Toyota. Wow. Here am I sitting on my high horse, being all pretentious and driving my Buick, thinking that, yes, American cars are the best. American cars are better than South Korean cars. South Korean cars are pieces of junk, blah, blah, blah. And then here am I don't even know what on earth I'm talking about, because apparently Hyundai is the fourth best automotive manufacturer, the fourth largest, and the most, one of the most honored car manufacturers of the entire century. At least in terms of my, in terms of my own perspective. I mean, like, that carries a lot of weight. That carries a lot of weight. That reward that they won carries a lot of weight. It's amazing. It's amazing. It's simply amazing. This is like the American dream, but in car manufacturing form. They are larger than GM, Volkswagen, and Toyota. And I find that to be very respectable. I find that this is how they want to this is how they want to be perceived, as a car company that is worth keeping, a car company that is viable, a car company that is healthy, then I'm all for it. I mean, I'm all for it. I don't particularly like Hyundai or Kia, but they are in the business of bettering themselves. And I cannot be upset with a car company that is bettering itself. Chrysler, on the other hand, is not bettering itself. Chrysler just seems to be on life support. And like I said in a podcast a while ago, Chrysler is on death watch. We are just waiting for the telephone call that Chrysler has finally bitten the dust and, crossed the River Jordan on over into Gloryland. I mean, this is... wow, it's amazing. It's amazing the stark contrast between a car company that was once known as being absolutely horrible, having terrible quality. It is amazing to see the stark contrast between how they were able to identify their issues, grow their company, better themselves to the point where they're making a desirable vehicle. And, Chrysler, which has been around since 1927 or something, just doesn't feel like doing that. I mean, it is what it is, I suppose. So please stay tuned for the next segment in which we begin to talk about the aspirations for luxury amongst the Korean car brands and what sorts of efforts they've made towards making luxury car brands. So please stay tuned after the break.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
All right, welcome back, car lovers. In the last segment, we discussed Hyundai and basically their history on how they began to rise up from I guess what used to be the ashes, not the ashes like they burned down, but it was like they were just overlooked. They were never cared about. So welcome back to the car podcast in which I'm going to be talking about these things. I mean, we were talking about how Hyundai came from being an overlooked car company into a very viable car company today, even being the fourth largest car company in the world. And then now we are going to be talking about their aspirations for luxury. So let's get started on that. Hyundai started the Genesis luxury brand in 2015. But the Hyundai luxury brand started out as the Hyundai Genesis, which was a model that it made from 2007 to 2016 until it was renamed the Genesis G80 in 2016. Now Genesis has three different cars. The G70, the G80 that was previously the Hyundai Genesis, and the G90, which was previously the Hyundai Equus. I remember seeing these cars. I remember seeing these commercials for the Hyundai Genesis before Genesis became its own thing. It's like they styled these cars to look like Mercedes-Benzes. That was not a secret at all. And which was one of the reasons why my dad actually really likes the Hyundai Genesis, because my dad had always wanted to own a Mercedes-Benz, and this was before he owned one. when he finally just caved and bought his dream car. He really liked the look of the Hyundai Genesis, how it looked like an S-Class. And I remember these commercials. They would, for example, this is what I remember vividly. It was this mounted police officer, like those Canadian mounted police officers, but he was obviously American. And then he was looking at someone's car and asking them what type of car it was, asking them if it was like a Mercedes-Benz or something like that. They're like, no, it's a Hyundai Genesis. And then they had this cute commercial and they closed it out and whatnot. And I was like, yeah, I can kind of see it. If you kind of squint, a Hyundai Genesis of that time period does kind of look like a Mercedes-Benz. And that was a very, very, very smart move on Hyundai's part. They imitated a German luxury brand. They went straight for the jugular. I mean, they were not pulling any punches. Hyundai does not pull any punches. Hyundai was like, you know what? I want in on that. I'm going to go for it. And then they went in. Like, I swear, it's like Mercedes-Benz and BMW and Audi feel like they are so untouchable and pretentious that they kind of just stay there thinking that nobody's going to go after them. And then so they continue to manufacture their cars as if though nobody cares to go after them. And that's simply not the case. I mean, Hyundai went directly after them. It's not like Hyundai was trying to compete with other lesser luxury brands like Infiniti and Acura, which are just fancied up Nissans and Hondas respectively. No, they were like, nah, screw all that. We're going to go straight for the German car companies and knock them off of their high horse, or at least have the hopes to. And that really was a driving force behind the success of the Genesis luxury brand now. Think of it. Hyundai went through and created an entirely new car brand. We have not seen a new car brand in a while. I mean, I can't really think of the newest car brands before that. The newest car brands were probably Lexus, Infiniti, and Acura that came out in the late 80s. As their own luxury car brands. And they came through and they came in clutch when it comes to the Asian luxury game. I mean, Asian car company, I don't want to generalize the whole entire culture, but Asian car companies really know how to do luxury. They really knew. I mean, we give it to the Germans, and us Americans are probably a bit too proud, but I would say that Asian car manufacturers manufacture much better luxury cars than Germans and Americans alike could ever hope to do. And I appreciate that because I am a luxury sort of guy. I will not drive a car unless it's a luxury car. I mean, as pretentious as that sounds, that's where I am. And the first product that I ever owned from one of these companies will probably not be one of their mainstream brands. It will probably be of one of their luxury brands. The first car that I drive from either one of these companies. Or if you're like Kia and you don't have a luxury brand yet, one of their luxury models that they still sell under Kia. If they ever choose to have a luxury brand, I don't know if that's going to happen. But it's real comforting to know that someone was able to stick it to the Germans. Maybe they weren't exactly. Let me try to explain. Maybe they weren't exactly trying to put the Germans out of business because that's not realistic. But I feel like, it was important for them to go after that because not only does it project confidence, and it projects in such a way that makes you know that it's a viable option. It makes you know that it's a viable option. When you go after luxury brands like Mercedes-Benz, and then you offer something that's cheaper and a probably better quality as far as reliability goes, you really cause people to think before they go and buy a Mercedes-Benz, like, gee, do I really want to go spend all that money to take care of this person or to go take care of this car when I know that I can just get a Korean car that's a lot cheaper and I'm still getting the same sort of levels of luxury? I mean, it really raises that question. And I feel like Hyundai, as far as its Genesis brand, is looking to answer that question. I mean, should someone buy a South Korean luxury brand over a German brand? And I'm not saying this because I hate the Germans or anything like that. I know German cars are wonderful. They are built for their own reasons. They are built using a different philosophy than I necessarily believe in personally for my own cars. But I feel like the answer is yes. You should buy a luxury South Korean brand versus a German brand. German brands are overhyped. They don't deserve all that hype. German reliability, just like I saw on unpopular car opinions on Facebook, German reliability is a myth. German cars are not that reliable. Maybe at some point they used to be, but they're not reliable anymore. With the South Korean automakers, you can already count on things being simpler, parts being a lot more common, and you can already count that despite the difference in price, you're still going to get every bang for your buck, if I were to put it that way, because you know how efficiently these cars are designed and how efficiently they're meant to function on every sort of standpoint. So that's what I feel about Hyundai, and that's what they've been doing. I mean, they've been going after Lexus and the German brands, and I agree with them. It's about time people start going after those. I mean, I feel like the South Koreans in their luxury car market are doing what the Americans should have done. Just like what I had done in my Cadillac What Happened podcast about why Cadillac should stop focusing so much on just the German rivals and start focusing on Lexus and trying to kill Lexus, at least, you know, trying to severely compete against Lexus. They keep on going after the German brands, and they're not really that succeeding. I mean, like, I feel like Hyundai is actually succeeding against going to the German brands. So, Mercedes-Benz, you know, pick up the game because Hyundai's are coming for you with their Genesis brand. Kia also has luxury cars. I don't want to leave them out. Kia also has joined the luxury car game with the Cadenza and the K900 in recent years. My personal thoughts on the Korean luxury brands. My personal thought on Korean cars in general is that I may not fully trust them just yet, but my feelings have softened in recent years. I have seen how competent the Korean car companies have been. I have seen how wonderful they have developed themselves. I have seen the products that they have made. I mean, like, it is crazy. If I were to just, you know, mention my top 5 Korean cars right now, I think I do actually have my top 5 favorite South Korean cars that I could mention. I would say number 1 at the top of that list is definitely the Kia Stinger GT. I mean, that's the new Doug DeMuro car, if you haven't followed Doug DeMuro. I mean, like, that's his new Doug DeMuro car after he sold his Mercedes-Benz AMG wagon. I feel like the Kia Stinger GT is absolutely awesome. That's a bold move from Kia. Kia, that used to make economy cars, is making sports sedans that are practical. It's a hatchback. And it's not like a hatchback it's not like a hatchback like a Volkswagen Golf hatchback. It's like a hatchback in which it's like a fastback sedan, like an Audi A7 sort of thing. That's amazing. That's amazing. The fact that I could even mention a Kia and an Audi in the same sentence is amazing. And let alone that they're making cars that are similar. And that probably could be sold to a similar demographic. That's amazing. I would say number 2 is probably the Genesis G80. Absolutely beautiful. I remember seeing one of these in a parking lot. I think I was at Dixie Buick GMC going to get a part for my car a few years ago, and I saw one of these in the parking lot at the dealership, and I just had to peer inside. These things are absolutely gorgeous. They are beautiful. They are stunningly beautiful. And these are South Korean cars we're talking about. These are cars that used to be the Sophia and the Sportage for Kia, and that used to be like the Sonata for Hyundai, when at least whatever their thing was, like their first car was a rebadged Ford Cortina. That's what they used to be, but look at where they are now. How much they've risen, how much I appreciate their efforts in the car world. If number one is the Kia Stinger GT, number two is the Genesis G80 or whatever it is. I would say number three, let's see. Number three would probably be the Hyundai Azera. Hyundai Azeras, I had actually considered purchasing one before I purchased my current car, and I just couldn't find one for a good enough deal. But the Hyundai Azera is a really nice car. I've seen them, I've considered buying them, and especially with the reputation for reliability that Hyundai is getting these days. I mean, like, I wouldn't be surprised if my Hyundai Azera lasted me a while if I ever bought one. Yeah, the Hyundai Azera is a really nice vehicle. The one that came before it, the Hyundai XG350, I recognize that these were still when Hyundai and Kia were not good cars and they were pieces of junk. But man, was that thing just pretty. It was a real small but real pretty car, built on the same platform, I believe, as the Hyundai Sonata of the time period. And it was just nice. It was just nice. It was cute. It had the leather seats. It had the, conservative, stately sort of styling. It had nice color options and whatnot. And I really like that. And I know that they're probably selling for pennies these days, and they're probably not worth anything on the amount of how many problems that they've given. But I mean, like the Hyundai XG350, I really like. And, let's see. I don't know. It seems like I keep on saying Hyundai or Genesis. I only had one Kia on the list. But probably the Genesis G90. I mean, I love the G80, and the G90 is just so tastefully done as well. I mean, I didn't realize how good this car looked. The pictures don't do it justice. You have to see it in traffic. You have to see the sort of stately presence it commands. Those are probably my top 5 favorite Korean cars. But back to just with like a minute left in this segment, I think Hyundai and Kia are doing with luxury cars here in America what Americans should have been doing with luxury cars. Americans should not kill the luxury car in favor of the luxury crossover or the luxury SUV. They should keep the luxury car. But part of me doesn't see that happening because the American car companies have already, seen the writing on the wall that nobody wants to buy their luxury cars anymore because nobody wants to buy cars in general. So they've begun to do away with them. And I feel like the American sedan game is going to be dominated by maybe Hyundai and Kia. I mean, and their luxury sedans too. So who knows? We'll just have to find out. But please stay tuned after the break. I'm going to tell you a story and sort of an update on where I am in my car life. So please stay tuned after the break.
Do you work in the world of marketing and advertising? Are you a media buyer or the owner of an agency? Have you been looking for a podcast to help stay on top of all the goings-on of those worlds? The GSMC Marketing News Podcast is dedicated to keeping you up to date on all things concerning marketing and advertising. Get the latest marketing news, from what major businesses have planned for the coming year to the newest trends in advertising, from podcasts, digital and streaming, to the old standbys of radio, television, and billboards. The GSMC Marketing News Podcast has you covered, whether you're a marketing agent or a business trying to expand your brand.
Okay, welcome back, folks. Here is my little car story for you all. Yeah, I'm glad that you all were able to enjoy the podcast on, at least so far in the podcast, on the Korean car brands, the South Korean car brands, and how they're making great headway for themselves, and they are moving ahead in leaps and bounds as far as everything goes, including their own luxury cars. I felt like after the recent couple of days I've had with my good old car, my 2004 Buick Park Avenue Betty Love, I feel like I had to dedicate a portion of this podcast to telling you all a car story, because, I mean, it is a GSMC car podcast, so a car story is more than fitting for this. Let's start way back. Mostly so I can feel all of the time, but starting way back. I have owned 4 cars. Of course, I've not actually owned 4 cars in my own right, but I have been the owner in a sense of the one that takes care of the cars, the one that drives the cars. The cars have all been under my dad's name. I mean, as you all have guessed, I'm pretty young. I have not had the chance to be able to buy my own car and put it under my own name. But my first car was a 1998 Cadillac DeVille that we had in the family for 10 years. I named him Caddy. My second car was Miss Faith, a 1997 Cadillac DeVille that I owned for a year and 8 months. That car got me through my entire freshman year of college and my first 3 days of sophomore year of college. That's another story for another time. I had an absolutely atrocious automotive abomination of a car, a 2009 Honda Civic Hybrid. And then I was sick of it. So I only owned it for 4 months, and then thankfully in those 4 months, it got totaled in a car wreck, and I never saw it again, and I never buy another hybrid vehicle like that ever again. If I were to buy a hybrid vehicle next time, I'm going to test drive it before I buy it. I'm not going to buy something as dangerously slow as that. Now, this is where I bring to you my whole point. This is where the story actually kind of officially begins. You see, every time I am in the market to buy a car, which has been more than I care to admit over my driving career, I always do extensive research before I buy an automobile. I bought my second car out of emotion because I missed my first car, and I went out and I bought the same exact car afterward. And the third car was my dad's fault. I gave him my money, and then he went to an auction and somehow got me the one type of car I told him not to get. And then I had to get rid of that car because it was totaled, and I started doing research. I had always done research on luxury cars because I knew that I would only drive a luxury car. And get this. I needed a car that was as comfortable as a Cadillac, but had actual reliability and didn't have the problems that a North Star engine would have. Because I knew if a North Star engine ever decided to go kaput on me, I would be very poor after having it worked on. And I decided that I couldn't do that. So I was like, what cars are just below Cadillac in the GM lineup? Oh, yes, Buick. So let's go see. Okay, I'd done my research on the Buicks. I saw that they had the 3800 Series 2 engine. I saw that the Buick Park Avenue Ultra had a supercharged version. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to get myself a Buick Park Avenue. And sure enough, my dad found this absolutely gorgeous silver Buick Park Avenue for $3,300. And he was able to talk the man down to $3,000, and we were able to buy it cash with like 75,600 something miles on it. So I bought that car, and then I started driving it. And I have been absolutely satisfied with my car. I love it. It is the absolute best car I have ever owned. And then I started driving it. And it's not like this is where the story goes downhill. I mean, I've driven it and I love it. I took it all the way clear up to Connecticut last year and it didn't have a problem. This car has just been so absolutely reliable. But, I mean, granted, I have doubled the mileage on it in less than 3 years. Now the car has just over 143,000 miles. So I have put approximately 68,000 miles on the car in about 2 years and 10 months. I've put 68,000 miles on my car. And the car is beginning to show its age a bit as far as mechanical things. This year, I had to replace all of my brakes. My entire braking system was going. I felt one day that my brake system was beginning to get mushy. My brake pedal was getting mushy, and the car wasn't stopping the way I liked it to. And when it comes to brakes, I kind of freak out about those things, as well anybody should, because if you don't have brakes, then you can't be safe in an automobile. But yeah, so what I end up doing, I end up having it taken to a shop out in Lakeland, where I used to get my car serviced at a wonderful place called Joyce Automotive. And then they looked at the car and they were like, yeah, you need about $1,100 worth of work. And that's before we even look at the front brakes. I was like, excuse me? And, you know, being the idiot that I am, I was about to swipe my card for it. A broke college student, by the way. I was about to swipe my card for it because I just gotten my financial aid refund check. And I was like, hey, you know what? I've got like $5,000. So what's $1,000? And then it's when I called my dad and told him, he's like, David, you're spending too much money on that. Go and get another quote. And thank goodness, because my dad, honestly, he gives really great advice. I mean, sometimes we get on each other's nerves, goodness, but he gives really great advice. And he had told me, he's like, David, go see if you can go to another mechanic and get another quote. Okay, so that's what I do. I drive the car despite being told not to, but you know how mechanics are. They're always going to make you fear for your life. They're like, if I were you, I wouldn't drive that car. It's not safe, blah, blah, blah. Point is, I made it to Tampa. And then I took it to this place called E&C Brake. These people are absolutely wonderful. It's just the smallest little shop on like North Florida Avenue in Tampa, not too terribly far away from downtown. And they are really honest. The man who owns the car shop, his name is Eddie. And he is just a wonderful, wonderful man. So I take it over there, and then I asked him, I was like, look, here's what I believe the problem is, which my dad was like, no. You shouldn't tell them what you think the problem is. You should just let them find out for themselves. And I was like, Daddy, look, this is brake stuff. I need to have this, you know, checked out thoroughly so I don't end up crashing and dying or getting into a serious car accident. And then I had him check the brakes around what needed to be done. I needed rear rotors, I needed rear brake pads, and I need rear calipers, and I ended up needing, I didn't find this out much later, I ended up needing a master cylinder. So the man does everything for about half the price that Joyce wants to do it for. So he does it, car runs wonderfully. And then, you know, I was driving to school. I was driving to work. He fixed everything. Everything was fine. Well, you know how life goes. When everything is going fine, something has to come along and tear it all up. As you all know, we've had this terrible coronavirus pandemic that has gripped the entire world. So as a result, I've had to move back home. Well, there are certain things that my dad has done on his car that he goes to this mechanic. His name is Aniel. And I was like, you know what? If Aniel can work on my dad's terribly complicated 2003 Mercedes-Benz S-Class, he can work on my Buick too. So I took my Buick over to Aniel, only to find out that I needed a master cylinder as well. Aniel didn't think I needed a master cylinder, but I told him, I was like, look, I just changed the brake fluid. Just like last week in the car, they had changed it when they had fixed it. And then the brake fluid's already black after less than a week. It means the master cylinder was breaking down, and that was pieces of, you know, rubber seal in the master cylinder floating around there. That's not good for my brake lines. So he ends up changing it. And then everything goes fine. And recently the car hasn't given much trouble at all, except for, you know, the fact that my horn had gone out, but you all have already heard that horn story. So the other day, after, you know, months of the car running fine, not really having a problem with it, the other day, last week, I believe it was last Wednesday, I go to start my car, and the car doesn't start. And then I go to start it again, and it starts, but then it stalls, and then it shuts off. And I had remembered that when I was coming back from work the day before, the car had given me a check engine light. I was like, gee, what could that be? I know that when the weather begins to get cooler, my car doesn't like cooler weather, and the thermostat tends to stay stuck open. So I thought that was the source of my engine issue. So I was like, it's probably going to go away. I don't need to get it checked out immediately. Well, upon returning home, I end up finding it out the next day that the car doesn't want to start. The car doesn't want to do this. The car doesn't want to do that. And I'm kind of stressing out. Actually, that's a lie. I'm very much stressing out because I'm like, oh my gosh, I had just gotten my oil changed at some Valvoline not the year before. The week before, I was like, did they do something to my car? Because I know my girlfriend Katie, she drives a Honda Pilot, and then last time she went to those Jiffy Lube places or whatever, they put a faulty oil filter on her car, and her car was running very badly. And I was like, man, maybe they put something wrong in the oil. Maybe they did something. I'm going to get these people, blah, blah, blah. I'm spewing. I'm talking out of my rear end. All right. Which is expected of me because I love my car very much and I'm not trying to get rid of it. So I start, trying to look under the hood and find out. And of course I can't find out what it is. So I end up having to call up AAA. Now, I have not renewed my AAA membership yet this year, at least not at that time. My dad was supposed to do it, but he never got around to doing it, so I just bit the bullet. I paid like $174 just to get it reinstated, reactivated. Okay. And I was like, can I call a tow truck to come and take my car? No, you have to wait for 3 days. So, for 3 days, I was driving my dad's Mercedes-Benz to work. And then, on Friday, I finally get the tow truck in, and then they take my car over to Aniel's shop. All right. I'm at Aniel's shop, and I told the person there, his name is David, just like me. I told him, I was like, look, I'm bringing in the car. Let me know when Aniel's here so Aniel can take a look at it, blah, blah, blah. And then he's like, yeah, sure, for sure. So I'm looking, and I'm waiting, and then I finally see Aniel. And he's like, okay, you're going to have to leave it. And I was like, he's like, I might not be able to look at it until tomorrow because this was Friday at this point. I was like, you know what? That's not a problem. I've got another car to drive. I'm not in a terrible rush. And so what ends up happening, he ends up calling me while I'm on break at work, and he ends up telling me, he's like, look, your fuel pump is not bad. It's a MAF sensor. And what's a MAF sensor? A MAF sensor is mass airflow sensor. It's the sensor that tells you how much air is going into your engine. It tells the computer. It controls the amount of air going into the engine, because in order for the engine to run, it needs fuel and air, correct? Yes. And so he's like, okay, it's going to be about $200 to fix. The part is going to be like $140, and it's going to cost me like $50 to put it in. I was like, okay, yeah, that's not a problem. And he calls me back, and he's like, actually, upon further inspection, I found out that you need intake manifold gaskets. Your lower intake manifold gasket and your upper intake manifold gasket are going bad, and they need to be changed. And he's like, that's a common problem with these 3800 engines, but he's like, I've got a reinforced gasket that I'm going to use, and I'm going to make sure that the car is not hurt. And I'm okay because I'm real patient with Anya. I trust him. He's a good mechanic. So everything is going fine. And then Monday, sure enough, my aunt takes me down to Aniel, and then he's like, yep, your car is good. You can come pick it up. You can drive it home. So I'm driving my baby, and like, she's picking up, and she's accelerating, and she's a very happy, healthy car. But then I noticed something. I noticed that I'm revving up to like 4,000 RPM. And like, my transmission is shifting fine. It's not like they're shifting roughly or the car's jerking every time it goes. I don't believe it's a transmission problem. But I was like, oh, that's odd. But I don't take much stock into it. Until yesterday, I was called in to go to work to help cover somebody's shift. And I have a job other than this. And I work at a news station. I work there typically from 3 to 1:30 p.m., 3 a.m. to 1:30 p.m., but I got called in from 4 a.m. to 7 a.m. just to run the teleprompter for our morning series of shows. And so I'm doing that. All right? And then I leave work at 7 so I can get back home and go to sleep so I can go out and run my errands. And I was going to get my car washed and everything. What ends up happening? I'm on my way back, and as I'm crossing the oh goodness, the Midpoint Bridge in Cape Coral. I come off of the Midpoint Bridge, and the car starts, erratically, revving on me. It's like revving way up, going all the way down. And then it's like acting like it's about to die, but then it picks itself back up again, and then it starts revving and revving way down and way up all over again. All this foolishness. So I'm like, oh my land. So I'm driving on Veterans Parkway. I'm driving like a good 60 miles per hour, even though the speed limit over there is only 50, but I don't care. I'm driving a good 60 miles per hour. And I end up having to make a really quick maneuver, cut over 4 lanes of traffic, over into this side road, and then, into this other side road so I don't get into any, car accidents, so people who are not expecting me to just stand there, and I'm just standing there. So I sit, I park the car, and I'm just letting the car trying to figure itself out. I turn it off. I turn it back on. The car doesn't start. I was like, oh my gosh. I turn it off. I turn it back on. What ends up happening this time? The car ends up sputtering, and then it dies. And now I turn it off, and I turn it back on. And then this time it's revving to 2,500 RPM down to 1,000, 2,500, 1,000, 2,500, 1,000, 2,500, 1,000. And I'm like, oh my gosh. I felt like I didn't think my engine was going to explode, but I felt like there was something seriously wrong. And what ends up happening after that is that I turn off the car and I turn it back on another time, and then it sits at a nice, good, and happy 1,000 RPM. And as I'm shifting gears, I can notice that the engine revs are not acting as erratically as they used to be. So I was like, okay, Jesus, let me be able to make it home. I make it home, and of course, I'm exhausted. I go to sleep. I wake up again at around 11. I call up Aniel after I try resetting the battery on my car to see if that was the issue. No, that wasn't the issue. He's like, okay, bring it back. So I end up having to call a tow truck again for the second time in a week, only to have it towed to Aniel's shop. And then he tells me that he can't look at it that day because he's real busy with some other cars. So he's going to look at it that night, and then he's going to call me today and then tell me what ends up happening. So, I mean, I don't know if this thing just needs to settle in on itself, if the mass sensor that he bought was faulty. I have no earthly clue what's going on with my car. And he done the gasket job, and even though he used reinforced gaskets, I don't know if this is some leftover, coolant that may have dripped into the engine that's burning off. But as the tow truck driver was taking my car onto the tow truck and off of the tow truck, I can notice white steam coming out of my mufflers. And I'm like, it wasn't doing that before. I was like, please check that out. He's like, don't worry, I'll check it out. And so I'm on this case. I'm like, bruh, I'm kind of scared for my Buick here. And my aunt drives a 2005 Buick Park Avenue Ultra. She loved my car so much when I got it that she decided to go get herself the same car as her first car. So, I mean, I don't know, man. I'm talking to her because she was the one who took me to the mechanic shop. And I'm talking to her. I was like, goodness, I hope he didn't mess up my car. So I will let you all know the moral of the story, or not the moral of the story, really. There's not really much of a moral to it. I will let you all know the outcome of what happens to good old Betty Love, who is my Buick Park Avenue. And thank you so much for listening to the GSMC Car Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. This was David Lucy Mabel speaking to you all today. And please stay tuned for our next podcast. Please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Leave us a like, leave us a comment, share us with your friends. Do anything that you can do to get the word out so we can have some more people listening to this podcast. And thank you so much, and have a wonderful night, folks. And stay happy and stay healthy. Goodbye.
You've been listening to the GSMC Car Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type GSMC into your favorite podcast app to find all of the shows from the GSMC Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, from business news to weird news. Please subscribe to the podcast and follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you've enjoyed today's episode.